This is ILTV on the hour, bringing you the biggest stories from Israel and the Middle East. I'm Khaled Ben David. It's 2 p.m. in Israel, and today is day 650 of the war in Gaza. Let's get into all the top headlines this hour. Syrian government forces have reportedly begun withdrawing from Sweida after Israeli military action to protect the Druze community there. The withdrawal follows the announcement of a truce with a local Druze spiritual leader, although reportedly rejected by other prominent community figures. The Syrian government said the ceasefire would bring a complete halt to its military operations in Sweida, even as some Druze leaders call for more Israeli protection. Syrian President Ahmed al-Shara, in a televised address, promised to take steps to protect the Druze community and criticized Israel for what he says was complicating the situation and pushing it toward a large-scale escalation. He added that only intervention from U.S., Turkish, and Arab leaders prevented the situation from blowing up further. Here's more from al-Shara.
الحرب المفتوحة مع الكيان الإسرائيلي على حساب أهلنا الدروز وأمنهم وزعزعة استقرار سوريا والمنطقة بأسرها، وبين فسح المجال لوجهاء ومشايخ الدروز للعودة إلى رشدهم وتغليب المصلحة الوطنية على من يريد تشويه سمعة أهل الجبل الكرام. فلسنا ممن يخشى الحرب، ونحن الذين قضينا أعمارنا في مواجهة التحديات والدفاع عن شعبنا.
The announced ceasefire came after U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said parties to the conflict have agreed on certain steps for a truce. A previous ceasefire had little effect, with more than 300 people killed in the sectarian fighting involving Syrian Druze, local Bedouin, and government forces. In the lead up to the truce, Israel maintained its bombardment of Syrian government forces and targets in Damascus, vowing to defend the Druze. Some 1,000 members of the Druze community in Israel rushed to the border to join the fight. Israeli security forces are trying to return those who entered Syria back to Israel while bolstering security on the border to prevent any more Israeli Druze from entering. IDF Chief of Staff Eyal Zamir visited the Syrian frontier and said that Israel will act with determination to prevent the entrenchment of hostile elements along the border. It will protect the citizens of Israel and prevent harm to the Druze. Israel carried out some 160 strikes on Syrian targets yesterday, including on the defense ministry in Damascus. The IDF says it's prepared for days of fighting in Syria if needed. Well, for more, we're joined by journalist Loreena Khatib. She is a member of Israel's Jewish community. Loreena, thank you for joining us. The Syrian government says there's a ceasefire. What are you hearing about what the actual situation is there in Sweida?
First of all, good afternoon. The situation after the ceasefire in Sweida is calm right now, but in some areas there are still clashes and attempts to harm the people. But we cannot forget how in the recent days, dozens of innocent civilians, including women, children, and elderly, were brutally murdered and slaughtered in Syria. According to the first-hand sources, over 2,000 bodies of Druze victims have already been counted, and we have many that are being hidden or disappeared in hospitals. And yet the world remains silent. The terrorist regime of Shara al-Julani, dressed in a religious garb, continues to target Druze and minorities in Syria. And I think that those atrocities remind us of the horrors of October 7th, the same murder ideology, the same extreme brutality, and the same radical actors are operating again. This time, the victim is different. It's against our Druze brothers and sisters in Syria.
Right. And Loreena, as I said, reports of up to maybe more than 1,000 Israeli Druze actually crossing the border into Syria. There is concern, for example, in the IDF, they could, for example, be subject to violence, potentially kidnapping. What are you hearing about what's going on with those Druze that have crossed into Syria, the Israeli Druze?
First of all, I can understand their pain, their anger, and the desire to protect our brothers and sisters across the border, especially after the terrible thing we've seen. However, I ask everyone who crossed and still there at the border, to be careful and to let the spiritual leadership led by Sheikh Mufaq Tarif to work in full cooperation with the relevant security and political authorities. I know that most of them came back, sorry, to Israel, and we are still working in order to bring all of them to the country.
And Loreena, the Israeli actions, there's been some international criticism about it, even some differences with the U.S. But what does the Druze community here in Israel want to see Israel do with this situation? You described it's still very tense. What do they want from Israel moving forward?
You know, we as a Druze, as an Israelis, we expect and the government to stand beside our brothers and sisters in Syria. We cannot afford to stand by them, not only because these are our brothers and sisters, not only because Israel holds, you know, a moral debt to our brothers and sisters and to the Druze community within our borders. We have to protect our northern border. This is also, you know, the same forces that was responsible for these massacres that happened in southern Israel, and it could one day turn their in attention, you know, to our north border. So it's a strategic and humanitarian security interest. And Israel, you know, promised and kept its word. It was late, but it still acted. Israel can help, and it's not, getting involved in another country's issues. It's about protecting an important area, protecting our allies, and stopping war crimes we have seen happen too many times before. I'm not, we all know that Ahmed al-Shara gave a speech blaming Israel for the crisis, and he tries to appear, moderate and claims to protect minorities' rights. But we must not be fooled again by the suit. There is a terrorist hiding behind that suit. As someone who knows the region and understands the Middle East, it's clear that there is no reason to have more hope in Syria's new president, Shara. He's just a terrorist in a suit with a long history of violence and cruelty. We must not believe empty promises. Every announcement is in blood.
All right. Well, certainly we hope that the Druze there in Syria are protected in any way that they can be, and those Israeli Jews who went across the border get back home safe and sound. Loreena, Khatib, thank you for joining us on ILTV.
Thank you very much.
Well, for more analysis of the situation in Syria, we're joined by Sarit, Zehavi, president of the Alma Research Center, which focuses on issues, especially in the north, security issues. So we heard from Loreena, our previous guest, what the Druze community in Israel wants. You could understand their concern for their brethren in Syria. But these actions by Israel are getting criticized internationally. There's some issues with the U.S. Was it the right thing to do is what Israel is doing the right thing overall for the security interests of the country?
I think a few points should be mentioned here. And the first one is that there are different opinions among the Druze, including the Druze in Israel, but especially with the Druze in Syria. You have over there 4 leaders. 3 of them are saying that the Druze in Syria should be integrated and have a dialogue with the new government over there. And the one, El-Hijri, the one that is saying that they should continue to fight those jihadists, which I agree, they are jihadists, is the one who is calling for our involvement. There is another leader who is saying, okay, we should fight the jihadists, but Israel should not be involved. This is an internal issue in Syria. What I'm trying to say is that there are different opinions around that. And I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, I can, sir.
Okay, there are different opinions around that among the Druze in Syria and in Israel. And that's why it was a huge dilemma for the Israeli government, how exactly to assist. It is clear to all of us that Israel should assist the Druze minority in Syria to make sure that there is no genocide over there. The question was of how exactly to do it and what would be the most impactful operation with minimum risks, which you all understand there are a lot of risks. The second point I want to make is that the fact that only after Israel involved, it got to the news internationally, it's just unheard of. I just can't understand that. if it's Druze Syrians being killed by a Druze government or Druze militia or Syrian militias and Syrian government and Syrian Sunnis, nobody's paying attention. But when Israel is getting involved, suddenly everybody is paying attention. I think it should be the opposite. Everybody in the world should pay attention to the fact that minorities are being attacked by the new government of Syria and ask the most important question: whether al-Jolani wants to build a new state, maybe Islamic state, but is looking towards the Saudi model of an Islamic state with good relationship with the West, or is he still in his heart part of Al-Qaeda, and actually everything that he had done in the past few months was just a cover to his true beliefs that are exemplified by his own militias.
Since you raised the question, because that is the debate and that is the crux of the matter, what is the true nature of al-Shara Jolani? And even if he was sincere in wanting to moderate Syria, does he really even have the ability to control that country now? So let me ask your view, because that is the question people are asking. What do you think?
So, after October 7th, I just decided that I stopped trying to get into my enemies or my neighbors' heads. And I think that what we should do is try to analyze, you said, capabilities. I think that's the right thing, whether he is capable of truly controlling his own militias, and what's the capabilities that he has that can threaten either the minorities in Syria or us over here in Israel. This should be the questions that we should ask, and this is how we should address this. And the fact that the sanctions were lifted from the HTS, not only from al-Shara himself or specific personalities, from the HTS, which there is no debate around what is the HTS and what kind of relationship it has with Al-Qaeda, this is truly a failure to understand the situation in Syria. Sanctions should not be lifted from terrorist organizations. If those terrorist organizations still exist, the sanctions should continue. And if they don't exist, well, it doesn't matter. I think this is one of the ways to deal with it. My last point, and I think it is also connected to your question, is about the negotiations. Because in a feeling that we're going to eat hummus in Damascus, and we woke up with kind of a small war here. And I want to say something about it, because I think that eventually, because the whole world internationally is locked on creating relationship with the new Syrian government that way or another, and creating an arrangement between Israel and Syria, we will end up in that. And since we will end up in that, we need to make sure that our security needs are met. And what happened now exemplify very, very clearly to the whole world what are the security needs of Israel. Even if the cost means that al-Jolani will not be able to realize the sovereignty of its regime all over Syria. This is clear. That's the price. We all understand that. Now it's time for international arena to understand it.
The international arena, but one of the countries that have lifted those sanctions is the United States, and President Trump himself lifted it. There could be many reasons. There's also the influence, for example, of U.S. relations with Turkey, which are quite important to the U.S. and perhaps to President Trump. How is that problematic for Israel that at least on Syria, right now, the U.S. and Israel don't seem to be on the same page?
I think that eventually we will be at the same page. President Trump, I think he kept his promises to Israel until today, and he proved to be a true friend to Israel. But he is a businessman at the same time, and he believes in making business. And I think that's the motivation behind all of that. What he now, I believe, will have to understand is that making business in the Middle East is a little bit different than making business in the West, and you can have arrangements and commitments and agreements that were meant to be broken. That's how the jungle works here, and that's why it's very important for Israel to get to the table of negotiation from his very strong stance. What we had done in the past few days brought us to the negotiation table from a very strong stance, and that's why I think with all the brutality that was happening here, as Loreena described, there is a small light in this, that maybe this will have actually a positive effect on the negotiations for an arrangement with Syria, even though the gaps are huge between the Israelis and the Syrians in this respect.
Right. Let me finally ask you, I mean, if it's true that either al-Shara Jalani cannot be trusted, or he simply cannot control Syria and the country starts to break apart, Israel is going to need a longer-term strategy to protect the Druze and its border than just launching airstrikes. I mean, there are some people have suggested even creating an autonomous Druze region in southern Syria that would be backed by Israel. I mean, what's your feeling about what the long-term strategy has to be here if we come to this kind of situation?
Israel should walk between the drops because we learned in the past experience from Lebanon that Israeli involvement, like what you just described, in neighboring countries, it's failed. We are doomed to fail. We cannot dictate to neighboring countries the whole politics arena and internal situation between the different sects of those countries. We need to be very focused on defending our interests and the lives of those minorities that we want to collaborate with, that are loyal to the state of Israel, as a gesture to what we just had done for the Druze in Syria. But we cannot expand that to something broader than that. I think this would be a mistake and it will be a failure. The bottom line is that we definitely put a high standard with the attack against the Ministry of Defense in Syria, and we have to be very careful not to be dragged to boots on the ground, divisions going into Syria. We don't want that. We have enough efforts that we are invested in various fronts. But I think that at the same time, if the United States will be at the same page with us, we will be able to create the right pressure on al-Jolani to secure the Druze in Syria and to secure its autonomy, because we all agree that the militias of al-Jolani cannot enter Sweida. It's not going to end up well. This is something that needs to be prevented, with all the nice talking about sovereignty of the new regime.
Right, but we have to, besides that, also preventing Syrian forces on the border. I mean, I just briefly, should Israel consider, then there's talk about this, an arranged security arrangement with this government, with al-Shara, and remove its, for example, those outposts that it's created on Syrian territory, or it simply can't take that risk?
I believe that now that we are getting again, if we will get again to the diplomatic route, our American friends will understand why it's so important for Israel to keep those positions that we entered to in the buffer zone, and until at least we will understand completely who is Ahmed al-Shara and what's his capability to control his militias.
All right. A lot of difficult questions and choices that have to be made by Israel and the international community when it comes to Syria. A lot of question marks here. Sarit Zehavi from the Alma Institute there in Israel's north. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
And moving on, U.S. President Donald Trump has made yet another optimistic announcement regarding a potential hostage for ceasefire deal with Hamas. Speaking at a White House ceremony, Trump said there is, quote, good news on Gaza. He thanked U.S. Envoy Steve Witkoff, and he declared that despite the difficulty of negotiations, a hostage deal is within reach. Trump did not provide additional details, except to say that, quote, we're working on a very high level. Now, Trump's comments came hours after a senior political source said a deal was more likely than not. Well, according to Israeli officials, the government is committed to the release of the hostages, but talks with Hamas are never easy or short. Israel has reportedly offered a new Gaza withdrawal map as hostage deal talks intensify. Now, according to officials, Prime Minister Netanyahu is showing fresh flexibility in negotiations with Hamas. At the same time, the IDF has announced it now has control of 75% control of Gaza, and it has completed a key corridor in the Khan Yunis area. And it is prepared for further escalation if no ceasefire deal is reached. Now, in other security news, a ballistic missile launched by the Houthis in Yemen was shot down last night by air defense systems. Sirens sounded in several communities near the Dead Sea. There were no reports of impacts or injuries. Now, since March 18th, when the IDF resumed its offense in Gaza, the Houthis have launched 61 missiles and at least 15 drones at Israel. Meanwhile, the U.S.-backed Yemeni forces have intercepted a weapon shipment from Iran to the Houthis. CENTCOM announced that the arms shipment contained 750 tons of munitions and hardware. It's the largest seizure so far of advanced Iranian weaponry intended for the Houthis. U.S. officials said their Yemeni allies intercepted the advanced weaponry, and among the munitions captures were anti-aircraft missiles, warheads, and hundreds of drone engines, air defense components, and radar systems. CENTCOM Commander General Mike Kurilla said Iran remains the most destabilizing actor in the region, and limiting the free flow of Iranian support to the Houthis is crucial to regional security, stability, and freedom of navigation. Well, let's move on. Moving now to Israeli politics. The ultra-Orthodox Shas Party has now officially bolted Prime Minister Netanyahu's government over the Haredi enlistment issue. But Shas chose to remain in the Netanyahu-led ruling coalition, leaving it with a narrow 61-seat majority in the 120-seat Knesset, and thus preventing its imminent collapse. Now, Shas's Council of Torah sages made the decision to order Shas out of the government, denouncing what it called the persecution against yeshiva students who refused to do army service. The Haredi parties, Shas and the Ashkenazi United Torah Judaism list, are demanding legislation ensuring that ultra-Orthodox men be largely exempt from IDF conscription, claiming military service compromises their strict religious way of life. But Yuli Edelstein, who chairs the Knesset Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, remains committed to advancing a bill that satisfies the IDF's manpower needs after over 21 months of war. Now, unlike United Torah Judaism, Shas is leaving the government, but it's not joining the opposition, thus retaining their committee chairmanships in the Knesset. Both parties have been boycotting coalition bills in the Knesset, harming the government's ability to pass legislation. Some 80,000 ultra-Orthodox men between the ages of 18 and 24 are believed to be currently eligible for service, but have not enlisted, and only about 1,800 enlist annually. That's far short of the IDF goal of close to 5,000. The coalition is now largely paralyzed when it comes to enacting new laws, but the damage will be limited as the Knesset goes on summer recess on July 27th for 3 months, which does halt most Knesset activity. Well, for more, we're joined by Tzipi Yarom. She is a journalist who covers the Haredi community and is part of that community. And Tzipi, thanks for joining us. First of all, explain to us, earlier this week, the United Torah Judaism list said we're out of the government, we're out of the coalition over this Haredi issue. The Shas Party, it seems to, if I may use a Yiddish expression, seems to be following a policy of nishkehei nishkehen. We're out of the government, but we're in the coalition. So we still, what is the strategy of Shas? Why is it choosing a different path from what United Torah Judaism did?
So, Kalev, first, thanks for having me. The answer to the question is actually very simple and was reported yesterday by Ishari Cohen at Kikar Shabbat website, Haredi website. He says, he reports from within the Shas rabbinical committee that decided that they should leave the government, that Aryeh Deri was sitting there saying, Netanyahu promised us that he will have some law in 3 months. So the previous Sephardic chief rabbi of Israel, Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef, asked him, do you believe him? And Deri's answer was yes. I think Netanyahu did not see that we are really serious about it, that we are going to leave the government. And since now he sees that we are leaving, he will seriously work on it and bring us into a solution. That being said, is going very well with an interview that was published this morning in Mishpacha, the magazine I'm writing for, with Moti Babchik, who is the aide of the head of Agudat Israel, Goldknopf, and Knesset member Goldknopf is actually was in charge of Agudat Israel being in the government, and he left the government a while ago. But Babchik still stayed in the behind the scene and running some issues of the party, and so he knows what's going on. And he said that Netanyahu times and again acted in a way that will suspend and delay the law, and he was not serious about it. And may I say, Netanyahu is a very seasoned politician. He knows how to do that. He knows how to achieve what he wants to achieve. And this time he wanted to achieve a delay. He got it. So finally, the Agudat Israel is leaving the government after 2.5 years. They're finally talking about it. But as a simple citizen who voted for United Torah Judaism, I'm telling you, I'm disappointed because we saw it all the time. So aside from our politicians, it looks like everybody saw it. Netanyahu was suspending it. He wasn't serious about it. Babchi claims that had Netanyahu been coming to Edelstein as he came this week and saying, hello, you need to do something about it. At the beginning of this government, we would have a long time ago.
Well,
so
Tzipi, let me cut to the chase there. The reason all these details matter is the question: does this bring the government closer to either collapse or, let's be more realistic, to early elections? Is all of this posturing about leaving the government, bringing this government and bringing Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to the prospect of perhaps early elections if there's no movement on this Haredi draft issue?
So I'll win answer first with my very personal belief. I don't believe it's going anywhere. I do believe it will go to early elections. Why? Because Netanyahu doesn't have any incentive to go on with it. It will bring him closer to early elections, but eventually he will have a longer time in the government than some previous governments had. And he knows that he doesn't have a mandate from his people to pass such a law. So it's actually a clash with a dead end. I don't see that Netanyahu wants this law unless really they pass something that will only include Haredi, not Haredi, everyone who sits and learns Torah, because it shouldn't exempt those who are not sitting and learning. So unless it exempts some of the Haredi students, and maybe when talking about sanctions, it will be more reasonable sanctions, then they will agree about. And may I say, Haredi Knesset members and others who were involved in it did agree to some sanctions. It's not like, okay, they said, no, don't put any sanctions at all. They did agree to some sanctions, maybe because it's their interest to have sanctions about those who really sit and learn. And it's a way to check who is learning and who is not. And if you're not committed to it, then leave yeshiva and go to the army.
Okay, well, that's the question. People outside the Haredi community simply don't understand, Tzipi, why the ultra-Orthodox parties are insisting on passing this law at a time when we see this really terrible rise in casualties among the army and the IDF. Is there not, where is the sensitivity, at least just politically, in the Haredi, certainly among the politicians, to this issue?
So 2 points. First of all, the main, I'll say almost the only mandate that our Knesset members have to be in a government or in a coalition is to act for yeshivas and in general for Haredi education. Any other matter is second to this matter. So if they don't deliver for 2.5 years, then they shouldn't have been there from the beginning. They should have stayed at the coalition and not give Netanyahu any length of breath. Now, why do they do that? Because for us, learning Torah is what gives us the right on this country, and even the right to fight for this to fight for this country. And it in a religious eyes, it's a partnership with those who are in the army, and we are, God forbid, not dismissing any soldiers that we cry for them falling, and many yeshiva students are taking upon themselves to learn in merit of some soldiers that they get their names and so on. They are not disconnected from it, but it is a clash of cultures
ideologies,
here.
life views. Yes.
Yes.
I think we're going
to. And I do believe that more Israelis do see the merit of learning Torah, but yes, it's still a clash.
It's still a clash. Tzipi Arom, thank you for joining us on ILTV.
Thank you, Kalev.
And that is a wrap here on ILTV on the hour. Stay with us, though, for more news. Thank you for joining us.